Yes.
Chair Snyder, we are live.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for participating in person and those watching us on YouTube and those participating remotely. Thanks so much. I know everyone's schedules are very busy, but I also think this is important work. So thank you very much for your engagement in the work. So I call to order the Transportation Technology Committee of the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, Wednesday, April 13th. So let's start by identifying the folks that are here in the room.
Jeanette Ruschel, Manassas Park.
Bob Snyder, OmniRide.
Mackenzie Love, NVTA Regional Transportation Planner.
Amanda Ham, Economic Vehicle Program Manager, VDOT.
Hardy Simpati, VDOT.
Reginald Wright, Virginia Tech Transportation Institute.
Dick March, Compass Transportation and Technology.
Great. And on the line, we have Joe McAndrew, Greater Washington Partnership, who asked for the opportunity to participate virtually, which was granted, and Mike Garcia, Fairfax County DOT, also asked for the opportunity to participate virtually. First person from Rockland County, and the second one, obviously, from Fairfax County. So thank you all very much for participating. Thank you again. A lot's been going on, and we all have a lot of activities right now, but this sort of long-term, longer term work is, I think, very important. It will shape the future for our citizens. So thank you. The first item is a summary notes of October 10th, 2021 meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review them? Any questions, concerns? I entertain a motion that they be approved.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? That passes unanimously. Okay. First substantive issue is the update of the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan. I recognize Mackenzie Love, our Regional Transportation Planner. Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chair Snyder. First off, I would like to thank the committee again and reiterate the chair's remarks of appreciation for your all's contribution to development of NVTA's inaugural Transportation Technology Strategic Plan, or TTSP, as I will refer to it for the remainder of the morning. The process to develop the TTSP began in 2017, and I'll give you a brief overview hitting the highlights of what took place to bring it to where we are today. In 2019, the development of the TTSP content began, and then we moved through a process of review with NVTA committees, such as yourself leading the charge, and eventually took the inaugural 8 strategies and content of the plan to the authority for their approval in 2021. Since that time, there has been one 6-month update on the implementation of the plan, and now we're moving forward today with another implementation update for you, as well as consideration of potential additional topics for consideration. I'd also like to highlight 2 major deliverables that have come out of the TTSP. The first being that we have recently updated the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority's Driven by Innovation newsletter to feature TTSP related content every month, so we can stay accountable to the public with what's happening with the plan and also fulfill our education intention included in the plan. The second is that the NVTA unanimously adopted the 2022 state and federal legislative program and legislative priorities in December of 2021. And that included a new position to support effective use of transportation technology. Each year, the focus of that position will be updated to reflect the state of the field, and each year will be informed by the TTSP. In the current edition, it focuses on supporting funding for innovative transportation programs throughout the Commonwealth and electrification and other low and zero emission vehicle technologies. With that, I'd like to show you a quick overview of what's happening with the 8 strategies currently included in the TTSP. I'll keep this high level because we have a lot of great content on our agenda today, and I want to save time for your discussion as a priority. But I did want to make sure that you know we're monitoring what's going on and that there is development around many of the strategies in the TTSP, and there are 8 of them in total. Some examples include, for the first strategy of the TTSP, which is reduce congestion and increase throughput, there has been a lot of action on that around the adoption or the update of Transaction, Northern Virginia's long-range transportation plan. For example, reduce congestion and delay is an objective of Transaction with 2 of the 10 performance measures that will use to be evaluate each project in the plan, focusing on that topic. Another example is under strategy 5, which is develop pricing mechanisms that manage travel demand and provide sustainable travel options. MVTA continues to serve as a co-partner on the Regional Multimodal Mobility Program, or RM3P, which has a mission of leveraging real-time data to improve travel in the region. And that project is now beginning and continuing its procurement efforts. And there was an update on that in our recent roundtable. Let's see here. The continuing through the next set of strategies in the TTSP. Another example for you is that in strategy 6, which is maximize the potential of physical and communication infrastructure to serve existing and emerging nodes. MVTA is currently in the process of developing and then integrating both top-down and bottom-up project lists for inclusion in Transaction. And we're looking to the TTSP to inform our review of those projects and development of any top-down initiatives that we might bring forward as a proposal. I'd also like to highlight a couple of updates that are happening in the transportation sector that don't map directly to any of the existing 8 strategies in the TTSP. The first is that OmniRide is considering implementing a microtransit service in Manassas Park area, which we can touch on a bit later. The next is that the NHTSA has finalized its first occupant protection safety standards for autonomous vehicles, which is a major step in the development of that technology. Finally, I'd like to let you know that VDOT has recently finalized its Connected and Automated Vehicle, or CAV, investment roadmap, and we'll hear a little bit more from our guest speaker, Amanda Ham, about that in just a few moments. After we hear our guest speaker, we could have a discussion about how these topics that might not map directly to our current 8 strategies could be considered for incorporation in the TTSP in another manner. With that, I'd like to I'll hand it back to Chairman Snyder. And if there's any questions from the committee, I'd be, of course, happy to take them.
Sure. Any questions from anyone in the room? Or anyone participating remotely? I know a question which we can get to the end, which is, to what extent are the priorities that we set forth in our plan actually working into the prioritization for funding of the particular project? So we'll hear from our CEO, Monica Backman, later on, and maybe that's something she may want to address. So let's move on. If there's no disagreement, let's move on to Amanda. Thank you so much. Look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. As everyone mentioned, and particularly Mackenzie, my name is Amanda Ham. I work out of the Office of Strategic Innovation, HARI, and I'm the lead for our CME program. So really quickly, I always like to define what CAV sort of encompasses for my program. So there are 3 terms: automated vehicle, connected vehicle, and connected and automated vehicle. And automated vehicle in particular is one I like to focus on. That definition is a vehicle that can conduct some or all of the driving tasks. The some or all is the key part. This is a really broad term. So it includes everything from the automated driving assistance systems that you see in production vehicles today, all the way to what you would hear in the news is like the self-driving, the driverless, the highly automated. This is a very broad term that encompasses all of them and recognizes the fact that the CAV program has to be prepared for all of those different levels of technology. I'll also note that automated vehicles, the technology that supports it, are sensors and an onboard computer, all of which is contained inside the vehicle, which means that for those vehicles, those on the transportation side, particularly the infrastructure side, are looking more at being aware of and responding to the needs of those vehicles, but we're not sort of directly managing what's in them. This is in sort of opposition to the connected vehicle, which is a vehicle that can share information with external devices, whether it's other vehicles, infrastructure, eventually smart devices, etc. Now, again, this is a broad definition, including everything from a vehicle that connects with, say, one device or only the other vehicles within its manufacturer, all the way up to a one-day vehicle that connects with literally anything that's in the Internet of Things. That one is very different because it has maybe one or two pieces of equipment in the vehicle that enable connectivity. And then the rest of the ecosystem, it relies on devices out and amongst the world on the roadway. And so that's where a space where those like the DOT are a bit more active, because what we put out, what data we share, what methods of communication we have impacts directly whether or not this technology expands. Connected non-automated vehicle is simply a vehicle that has some combination thereof of that technology. Lots of automation, a bit of connectivity, vice versa. It sort of depends on the different make and model, and it requires all the technology above. So if we could jump on to the next slide. So what's on the road today? I have a couple of examples, and when I say on the road today, I mean that you could go out and get one if you wanted to. I know that there's a lot of research vehicles out there, or there's fleet vehicles that are being managed, but for the average person to get hold of these technologies, this is what you can get to. And as a result is what is becoming more and more common on our roadways. Two of the classic examples of sort of AV and CV technologies. AV, probably the one you've heard of most in the news, is going to be Tesla's autopilot, or for those customers that have purchased the additional add-on, the full self-driving beta, which does, as you can kind of see in the picture, some of the driving tasks to the extent that you can take your hands off the wheel for a smidge, but you have to put back on within a number of seconds. It can do certain things well, certain things not so well. You can watch any number of YouTube videos if you want to learn sort of the nuances of that, and it's constantly being updated over the air. The Audi Traffic Light Information System is a CV application. It's been around since about 2016 and is functional here in Northern Virginia. So this is where Audis receive traffic light information from approximately 1,000 traffic lights through a data portal that VDOT provides, such that those folks who have these vehicles can see on the dash the status of the lights. Other examples of features that you can run across are below, things like automatic reverse braking, various other warnings. And so that's sort of the state of affairs for the technology that you'll encounter. And then I'd like to go to the news, sort of what's developing. I usually have a couple of examples across the industry. Obviously, there's a ton coming out all of the time, but just to sort of give you an idea, Too Simple, which is a company dealing with automated trucking, recently did an 80-mile trip at night from Tucson to Phoenix. In that trip, they did not have a driver in the vehicle and they did not need human intervention. Now, obviously, this is a demonstration. It's not in production yet, but that shows what freight is pushing towards. On the sort of passenger vehicle transit side, GM's Cruise, which is their automated vehicle sort of arm or subsidiary, recently petitioned NHTSA, which is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, to allow for them to sell their Origin next year. So that was in 2023, and the Origin is designed to have no human operation at all. It is also going to be a low emission or zero emission shared electric vehicle. That happened early, I'd say February, which was then sort of followed, interestingly enough, by NHTSA's announcement of their first regulations being finalized concerning occupant safety in ADS, so automated driving systems. And that was one thing McKinsey mentioned earlier, and is very interesting because it is a very narrow ruling. They only addressed crash worthiness. They were only looking at those vehicles that have traditional seating, so you still have your front two vehicles or front two seats. And it was only addressing ABS that was either dual mode, in which case you could have manual operation and then the various manual controls would tuck away, or those vehicles that did not have manual controls. So what this means is if for any vehicle manufacturers that are trying to put in technology out in the future, they will still have to address and get exemptions from all of the other standards. The crashworthiness is all that they talked about. And most of what they were doing were things like you can't use orientation of driver's seat if there's not a driver anymore. So they were changing that language up. NHTSA did point out that they will be making significantly more extensive regulatory changes in the near future concerning all sorts of other aspects of this, including my favorite, which is untraditional seating, including campfire seating, in which the seats all face each other around a campfire. So that's coming. Finally, I do like the bottom one, Neuro, which is an autonomous delivery company, which designs vehicles that are not designed at all for humans to ever be in them. It's just for delivery. They came up with this lovely idea of an external airbag for pedestrians. I don't know how it works. I have no idea how it deploys, but that just goes to show that there are lots of concepts that are constantly floating out in the space that result in a need for regulations or changes to the way, say, NHTSA looks at vehicles. All right, onward. So within all of this space, really quickly, the role of VDOT and the role of the CME program is in order to maintain our responsibilities for safe, efficient, and accessible travel. We have to be prepared for what's on the roads. We know that these vehicles are on our roads today and that there will be more tomorrow, either because people have more of them or companies use them more, or frankly, if the current vehicles are updated in their software so they're more capable. And like any technology, we know there are some benefits, we know there are potential negatives. And so as much as we can sort of estimate what those might be, we are trying to go after the benefits, encourage them, and mitigate any of the negative impacts. Really quickly, so the CME program background, I'm going to spend most of my time focusing on the Readiness project from 2021, but you can tell that over time we've been sort of building up different pieces of this effort, and just sort of like McKinsey and you guys' update of your 6-month sort of constant adaptation to technology. So are we updating our CME program plan on a regular basis. We can hop on to the next one. Okay, so the Readiness project overview, which I am happy to share additional information on. I know some of you actually participated in the series of workshops that happened over the course of 2021, like McKinsey did, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to figure out a couple of things. One, assess where we are. 2, figure out where we wanted to go. And based upon those 2 points of information, we could figure out the gaps and therefore the investments we need today. In order to do that, we actually had to build our own assessment because there wasn't anything for the specific level that VDOT is operating in. There were either very detailed assessments for specific use cases like red light violation warning, or there were very high level national ones. So we ended up pulling a bunch from different levels to come up with our own. From that, we then sort of set that aside and then did a use case discussion, looking at things that either we're going to have to adapt to, like passenger vehicles with new technology, or use cases that we might want to use, like probe-based pavement maintenance, where you use the LiDAR and cameras that are out there in the world to start sort of monitoring our pavement maintenance. And so from that, we then, as I said, figured out gaps, put an investment roadmap together, and we also put together an education strategy and a business strategy that were mostly for me, so I could have the best ability to both talk about this and educate our internal workforce and the rest of the Commonwealth on what we have found, along with a business strategy to start figuring out how to integrate these into the department. Next one. So the assessment, I will point out that that effort to figure out what we were assessing ourselves on did result in 495 factors that we looked at across 4 dimensions: infrastructure, people, processes, and technology. We used a technology maturity application model to figure out where we were at, with 0 being we have done nothing, and 4, we have done everything to be ready for the next 10 years. It will probably surprise no one that we did not have anything at level 4. frankly, because I don't know that anyone knows where everything this technology will be in 10 years. And if they do, they probably work for a company behind some very serious NDAs. So we ended up mostly in level 2, which is meets best current practices, with pushing into level 3, so ready for the emerging market in a few places like our research council is very advanced. The only problem with being at level 2, for all that we are working very hard on best practices, is a lot of the best practices for the industry don't currently include this technology. And so we are working hard to figure out how we should move forward with that understanding. Next slide. So the use case selection process, so as I said, we sort of pivoted from our assessment to what use cases. There were about 80 involved that we looked at. We eventually down selected to 15 based on where the technology was, where the penetration was, and also sort of what VDOT was already sort of investing in. We have a use case report that I'm happy to share out. It's quite detailed, but just to give you an idea, they organized the 15 use cases fell roughly into the 8 categories below, where we had driver mobility, safety, freight, traffic planning, pedestrian transit, planning, planned and unplanned events, and weather. So it covered a broad spectrum of areas that VDOT has some or a lot of responsibility in. We can jump to the next slide. Okay, our investments. We came up with 24. This is a relatively intimidating slide. I'm more than happy to share this in a more consumable format. We also don't have a ton of time because if you're going to have questions. So I'll just sort of say some highlights from here. Highlight number 1 is that please note that the years are not the years we're going to complete these. These are the years that we are going to start working on them. A lot of these investments will take many years to do, and frankly, will have to be done multiple times. An example is sort of the first one under process is develop CAD procurement policies. You have software as a service, mobility as a service, all of these sort of changes in how we are interacting with the technology and how we want to use it. We anticipate that there will be more new and innovative ideas about the technology in the future, so we will likely have to update those policies multiple times. I will also note that a lot of the things you'll see are on the upgrade or enhance or integrate side of things. VDOT has a lot of capacity. We have our data lake, we have a very good fiber network, et cetera. And so for those, we're already leveraging what VDOT has and just integrating the CAD aspects to it. So with that, I'll jump on to the next slide. So from there, we started looking at projects that would start these investments. And our first one was the systems mapping project. If you can recall all that list of bullets, you saw the word data a ton. The fact of the matter is that data, particularly if used well, gets real actionable information, which is what we're after. We understand that there's a bunch of new data out in the world, whether it's produced directly in the vehicles or whether it's coming from third parties or even coming from our own devices. It could be free, it could cost money, it could have different service models. With all of that understanding, we are going to do this project to map all of those options out there in the world to our systems that might use them specifically, and then look at those systems, figure out if they're capable of sort of ingesting this, what the cost might be to change, et cetera, and then also what information do we want to push back out. I gave the example earlier of Audi's production vehicles that use our information to do their traffic light information application. A sort of a much more down-to-earth version of this is currently if you hit a pothole and you call VDOT, that goes to the customer service center system, which then once that's filled in, enters a ticket in our highway management or maintenance management system, which then issues a work order, and then the work gets done, and then it goes back through those systems. Well, if we got that information from a connected vehicle per se, we want that to follow the same pathway. So those are the kinds of questions we want to ask so that we are prepared to take advantage of that data. And then likewise, as it's going through, do we want to generate information, say when the work order comes out, broadcasting out, hey, on Thursday, that lane's going to be closed so we can fix the problem. So we can move on. That's just one of the projects that ends up working towards 9 of the different investments. So I will now switch gears because I could talk about the investments and the various project aspects for a long time, but that would probably get boring. So I did want to end with sort of what's going on in Virginia. This is both VDOT things and then also things outside of VDOT's realm. So first and foremost, up here, we did our cellular, that's the CV to X is cellular vehicle to everything deployment back in July, where we had a huge partnership with Audi and Qualcomm, and VTTI and others, and we were able to demonstrate sort of two different aspects of connected vehicle technology. One was a more advanced version of the traffic light information that I'd already described. The other was a fully working connected work zone. And it involved a connected vehicle, a connected worker vest, and a roadside unit that was providing information about the work zone itself. So that was very, very cool. Additionally, I'm sure you guys are probably aware of it. The relay shuttle just down the road is up and running. So that's an automated shuttle that actually had additional funding that was just awarded. So it'll be running through the end of 2022. If you haven't ridden it, I highly encourage you to do so because it is a good experience for where the technology is in the world. Next slide. So these are the things specifically drilling into the connected work zone and the work zone safety. We took what we learned from July to continue building. We have two areas that I really want to highlight. One is the work zone builder app, going back to our data discussion and how much we need it. One of the areas where everyone could use more actionable information, human or computer, is in work zones. They're the most challenging scenarios usually, particularly if they're dealing with unexpected incidents like bad weather, trees in the road, etc. They're very dynamic and it's difficult for us to keep track of what's all going on, for the people in the work zone to keep track of what traffic is doing, traffic to figure out where to go. So in part of that, we've done our work zone builder app, which is a digital map of a work zone. We're working through that process to integrate it with VDOT and particularly looking at ways we can make sure that it's very easy to use and sort of you put in your 2 points and then it automatically pre-populates with where all of the various cones, et cetera, should go according to regulations. So we're going to be broadening our pilot testing and expanding some various user aspects of that. And we did use this as our baseline for our CV to X demonstration back in July. We also have the connected smart vest, which is just what it sounds like. If the connected worker vest, it communicates 2 ways. One with the vehicle itself saying your worker's present. The other, it actually lights up, vibrates, and makes noise on the worker if the worker is in a place where they're likely to have a collision with the vehicle, or if they step outside the protection of the work zone. And we are continuing with that, and we are working on developing 10 now, where we only used 1 before, and conducting 2 pilot demonstrations in live work zones that will also include smart cones and a base station. So that is currently being planned now. Next slide. I did also want to highlight the other final thing on work zone safety. I have a huge work zone safety because this week is National Work Zone Awareness Safety Week. I'm very excited about that. And that is our automated truck mounted attenuator program, working with VTTI and others. We have been developing our automated truck mounted attenuator. Truck mounted attenuators are the things that sit at the back of the work zone, and they have crash cushions, and they hopefully catch the vehicles before those errant vehicles get into the work zone and cause havoc. While the vehicles are designed for that purpose, it's still not particularly fun to be the one driving it. And so if we can take that person out and have limited automation where it's leader follower so that only within the work zone, that vehicle just follows a vehicle in front, we can reduce that risk to our employees and our contractors. And then the rest of the time, the vehicle is designed to be operated manually. So it's driven like a normal vehicle to all the more complicated scenarios. So that's been very exciting. And we just had our kickoff of most recent day. So excited to see that. And then final slide, I believe, is yes. Okay, so these are other things just going on. First and foremost, if in case you're curious, FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, is very active in this space. Their research program on automation and connectivity is called CARMA. I will note that their term is cooperative automation. They're talking about connectivity that actually interacts with automation. So that's what you will see on their website. And they are based out of McLean, Virginia. So they do a ton of testing in Maryland, DC, and Northern Virginia. Daimler is continuing to test their automated trucks on I-81. They've been there for a number of years, and they're based out of Blacksburg. The final 2 things, I have VTTI here. I always like mentioning this because these grants will likely result in vehicles on Virginia's roads. So US DOT granted funding to VTTI for 2 separate projects. One is ADS trucking fleet concept of operations. So that's automated driving systems. And the end goal of that is to do a coast-to-coast trip with an automated truck, and it should likely end in Front Royal. That was the original plan. COVID derailed that. That's a lot of state lines to cross. So I think that one will be, if they've continued working on it, but the actual trip may not happen for a little bit longer. The safely operating ADS and challenging dynamic scenarios. That grant is also funded by USDOT, and that is looking at automated systems and how they respond to unique instances. And my favorite question that came out from that one is I was talking with HTI about that as part of their research gathering project, and they mentioned flaggers. And so flaggers are the folks that sit there and they turn their sign that says stop and slow. And the question came, well, what does slow mean? And I've had a great deal of fun asking my fellow human beings around me, and I've gotten a whole bunch of different answers, some of which I would not want in my work zone. Someone was like, well, I guess I'd go the speed limit. But that's a horrible answer. But other people were like, well, it depends on the location. It depends on the conditions. Is it raining? Is it nighttime? So you can see that there are a lot of challenging dynamic scenarios for this automation to navigate, and that grant is looking at some of those. And with that, I believe I am done. Yes. So that was a whirlwind topics of sort of where the technology is, what VDOT is doing, and what's going on in the Commonwealth. I am more than happy to share any and all of my resources, anything we've produced, anything that we have done, background research, etc. I'm also happy to talk about any of the news or other questions people might.
Thank you. So questions from folks in the room? Yes.
Would you be able to share your, in detail, your education plans, the outreach and information, how you plan to interact with the public?
Well, yes, I can. Mars was more specifically related to the investment pieces, and sort of noticing that when we did projects, we would need to talk to sort of the different levels. So we identified different audiences. And so, for instance, you know, the internal process ones, that was more directed towards our own workers to understand that. And then as for the bigger projects, we are looking at how do we engage different aspects of the public. For instance, I can't talk too much about it because we're about to submit out for bid, but we have a project that we're going to look at doing a series of workshops with populations that might be disabled or have otherwise issues accessing the technology. So we sort of have a multi-layered approach for each investment or project about how we want to approach education with those. Because frankly, this is such a big industry that it's a little hard to just be like, here's everything. So instead, we're looking at here are the education and outreach things you need to consider each time you do something specific.
Thank you. Other questions?
Have you had any contact with CAVNU?
A bit, yes.
Because they're the most exciting thing going on in autonomous vehicles. They are working to speed deployment by building roads and lanes that will have autonomous vehicles on them. They have a big project in Michigan, and I know they have plans to do this every place in the world.
Which is a really interesting space because the Pew Research Institute recently did a major survey on AI. And within that survey, they included how are people dealing with or thinking of self-driving vehicles. And I was looking through some of that. And one of the things the population did respond with is saying that they would feel more comfortable with the technology with dedicated lanes, which is the area that CAVNU works in.
Yeah, but I think the key thing, I've drunk the Kool-Aid on this. So I believe that the more you have more vehicles that are out there, there'll be tremendous economic value. But the question is, how do you get it out there? And CAVNU is doing it. Public sector is not. CAVNU is, and they're partnering with the public sector. But it's,
yeah, we are looking at that, but again, there are some limitations on the types of projects and the funding and the availability. We can't just build lanes.
no,
So that's where we had some conversations with them, and we are continue to have the conversations with them on some of the other areas, not only just building new lanes, but also working within the existing lanes. So there was some conversation ongoing in some parts of the state where we have some special facilities that we could build some technologies for those special facilities. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're actually based in Virginia, I'm not sure. And I know the big project is in Michigan.
Their investment arm, of course, is in New York, last time.
Yeah.
Yes, Mike.
So is there any discussion or work to really retrofit, and that may be the incorrect word, but that's where I'll go with now, some of the current vehicles on the road? Our consultants that are working with us on our long-range transportation plan tells us that the life cycle of a vehicle on the road is about 15 years. Not that you own it for 15 years, but no car is better than the one that's paid for. So if people are holding on to the vehicles, but we want to encourage and continue to work with technology as it evolves, are those discussions happening? Can that be done?
So yes, on the automation side, it's a bit more of a heavy lift because you need sensors and the onboard computer. But like the truck mounted attenuator that we have, that is a retrofit kit. And so you're seeing that in specific types of vehicles and also seeing it more often in transit with buses, with other freight vehicles, a little bit less with passenger vehicles. That's a fair amount of cost for that small vehicle. Now, on the connectivity side, there are a lot of discussions about, well, can you use other smart devices to significantly enhance connectivity? The only issue with that is, can we already utilize things like Google Maps? Like, is there a way to push the information in and just enhance those services already that people are used to using? If that won't work, or if we need to do it expansive enough that it changes things a lot, we have to balance. We want people to have more information to act better, but we don't want them to be doing this, trying to figure out what it says, or it alarms and you're digging in your purse, and then you run into the work someone trying to tell you about. So that's an area where we have consistent discussion with industry, with researchers about, what does it take to build those systems, what information when. But there is a solid understanding that, as you said, we want the technology that is beneficial out there, helping as many people as possible. And that's not going to be just relying on new vehicles.
Yeah, in addition to that, just to add to what Amanda said, she's using the term automated vehicles, not autonomous vehicles, if you listen carefully. That's the terminology the industry is using now, more of an automation rather than autonomous. Means everything is self-contained. So the level of automation could increase slowly as the vehicles turn over, and they are increasing every year. If you get a new vehicle, there is the level of automation automatically increasing. But also the liability piece comes in. This is where the insurance companies, the lawyers, and judges, juries will come in, where if you put an aftermarket device in a vehicle or you retrofit that vehicle, if they get into a crash, who is liable? Is the original manufacturer of the vehicle, or the driver, or somebody who provided you the retrofit kit? Those sort of things probably have to sort itself out after a few of these legal cases, go through the court system all the way to probably Supreme Court to get some kind of decision out of it, and path forward for people to understand in general terms. A police officer can cite somebody properly if the vehicle has a retrofit, if it goes off somewhere else. And there are, right now, I think there's a case in California related to Tesla that is making its way through. Actually, in that case, the person was charged with a criminal offense. Typically, these are civil offenses. You sue somebody if you're in a crash. That particular case, the district attorney charged the driver for over-reliance on the technology, and as a criminal case in that particular case. So that's going through, depending on how judges and juries Beside that case will give us more insight into who is liable, the driver, technology, or even if you rely on technology, could you be charged? I don't know. Those are the things will ultimately dictate how quickly people will adapt these technologies.
I think you'll start to see retrofits with specialized vehicles. My friends at Robotic Research are working now with the Kansas City Transit Authority. We're retrofitting existing buses for precision docking. They also have projects where they're already deploying it for truck parking, and you don't retrofit the entire truck, but you have a truck house on a small vehicle, and so it's easier to do that. So I think those are not the type of thing you're going to see driving down the street.
Right.
But I think you will start to see something at some point.
Yeah, also, I could add a couple of other things as I made notes as looking at the presentation here in the conversation on the education piece. We have worked with UVA and developed a couple of basic courses on CAV, and now we are working with Virginia Tech on the communications piece. Will come out in May sometime, May-June timeframe. So those localities that have interest in staff development, we have those courses, CAV 101, 102 type of things, the basics of it. So broad staff, that's what we're asking all our VIA staff to get the fundamental knowledge of the CAV so they can make better informed choices. And those courses are available for broad use. So through NVTA, through other localities in Northern Virginia, is interested in training their staff, those are available. Amanda can get them in touch with UVA, and as Virginia Tech goes, that's more focused on different types of communications technologies, what's out there. Not that many people are aware of all the options. People think of communication as cell phone or the fiber. There are a lot more than that. There are all kinds of communications protocols that are available for Internet of Things type of connectivity that we want to highlight and educate people on. So there is a focus, not only the public side, but the staff development side, professional development for us at the agency as well as localities to really understand what's coming and to be prepared for. They'll adapt much easily something new that comes up. So the fundamental knowledge is something we're working on. The other thing that Amanda mentioned, the 495 factors that we considered and all these things, there is an Excel spreadsheet with all that stuff included in that. That spreadsheet is available, and we have shared that, I think, through our local assistance division, broadly send that to the localities, but I'm not sure when we mass distribute it to every locality in the state. I'm not sure if local staff, the true technical staff actually receive that. But if NVTA through your committees want to spread the word, those localities that are interested in looking at those factors and to prepare their own agency or assess themselves where they are within their own jurisdiction, all that information is available. We developed this with public funds, so we're making that available freely to whoever is interested in. Please let us know, we will do that.
Yes, and if 495 factors in an Excel sheet is intense. So if anyone gets to that and would like to sort of walk through it or say, I care about signals or I care about this aspect, I am more than happy to have any number of calls with folks. I know that, we worked with that spreadsheet for a good 3-4 months. And so please don't be scared by the sheer number of cells in that workbook.
Probably the other thing I want to mention is as probably the next item on the agenda, how the candidate projects would probably be used. And what we have done is we saw the Audi traffic light information, Audi vehicles driving around in Northern Virginia, getting information from VDOT traffic signals, 1,000, and we're increasing that every day to.
I just drove one of those. It is really nice, but it was outside of my budget. So
Yeah, but if you cross VDOT traffic signal into a locality traffic signal, that information is not available.
Mhm.
So any of this connectivity and automation in the future, there are some core fundamental changes that we need to adapt to. For example, the traffic signals, the local traffic signals. If they're sitting somewhere that information is not helpful, you have to take the daily step of making that information available to the private sector, like what we did. There are concerns with traffic signals and cybersecurity. We have figured that all out to push that one-way information out through some firewalls and rules, and everything was established there to share that information. That's all is getting that information. So as you think about investments in the TA or even local investments, making that type of whatever the data available for the localities to share with the private sector freely would allow the private sector to adapt that much quickly and to get the benefits as a region as a whole, as long as we have those goals. VDOT can only do so much. But that's one of the reasons we try to do this and develop those strategies and share, because every small jurisdiction is not going to have the staff or the time or the money to build this. So we spend the time building this to make it available. So across the state to everybody. So we want to take this opportunity at NBTA to pitch that idea. If you're interested in pushing that locality, we are here.
Srinabu, the Senior Transportation Plan Activity. Two-part question. First of all, earlier you both mentioned about CAV 101 and the spreadsheet. We'll be really interested, and especially we have our regional jurisdiction and agency staff committee here, RJAC, and that includes all the jurisdictions and agencies in Northern Virginia. Your members also there, so that will be a good opportunity where we can present those things. That can sort of CAV 101, and probably the staff who attend those meetings may not be the right people, but they can bring in the right people from their jurisdictions and agencies to attend those. We definitely, should we contact you?
Contact me.
Okay, that's the thing. We will definitely follow up on that. That will be great. Second part, we can discuss it. Probably you have more questions on that, but we can come to that. You mentioned right now about signals, especially where you have control over the signals that you manage, but most of the cities and Nottingham County manage their own signals, and that's where that kind of the coordination needs to happen. We are in the middle of updating our long-range plan transaction. As part of that, we developed project lists. We have been working with the jurisdiction and agency staff to look into those sort of issues where they may not have thought about, they have thought about some ITS improvements, some signal improvements in a corridor, things like that, but not necessarily looking forward to what needs to be incorporated in terms of automation or sort of advanced technologies. We have been working with them to think in that direction and encourage them to. It's still too far for them. They are thinking about the next 5 years or 10 years what needs to be done, but then we are trying to push. At least keep that in mind and keep your project description a little bit general in that sense, so that when time is ready, you can incorporate. If you go too narrow in your definitions, then the kind of legal requirements we may not be able to fund, but keeping the description a little bit more general, we will be able to do that. So we have been working with the jurisdictions agency staff to think more and incorporate those sort of general descriptions into the descriptions.
Thanks. Yes, well,
Observation to Monica's point about vehicles lasting longer. A couple of things kind of swirl together with that is, as long as the technology gets installed in the vehicle, they can update it. So part of what's occurring that we don't get a lot of attention to is they're building the computer and sticking it in the car, and we're waiting. The sensors are in there, the information's in there. So the very sensors that tell you beep, 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 there's someone to your, to your 4 and your 7, which are, the other points. Those sensors will also be the very things that help steer the car. And so a lot of that's coming in, and now what you're seeing is we see the display as Apple CarPlay, but in reality, there's all the technology. It's what's happening that we don't even really get yet, and they're unlocking it. You're seeing this a lot with the features you buy in your cars. A great example of this recently, I'm a motorcyclist, and KTM is out of Austria. When they build their motorcycle, they put everything on it, whether you pay for it or not. You then just have to give them money to unlock the software features, because it's no longer really as mechanical as it used to be. So now they can install all the features because the mechanics are now cheap. It's the flip side of now it's the software, the development, and the continuation. The other thing that comes with this is it's not just the internal combustion engine that lasts longer. Electric motors last even longer than the ICEs. So it is entirely possible to have vehicles that may be running for 15, 20 years, normal. Well, if you think about what a car looked like 20 years ago, think of like go back to a 2000s era Honda Accord. How many people want that? Well, there's a reason Teslas all look the same. It's because they want that Tesla car to look. Jeeps are a great example of that. You can't tell if one is 30 years old or if one is 30 days old. And Tesla's kind of fallen into that same model. So there won't be as many cars sold. It won't be as profitable to buy and sell cars. It's now going to be, what is the technology inside the vehicle? What upgrades do you pay for? What do the OEMs install? And how do you power them? That's kind of going to end up being where a lot of this takes us. And in the transit market, we don't get a Tesla building stuff like this for us. We don't have Nissan and Toyota. In general, the bus manufacturers and the truck manufacturers make it, and then we have to then tell the manufacturer of the equipment what we want on it. So we have to be experts in the technology to tell them what to bolt on, as opposed to them figuring out what's best for you. Yeah. And so it's really an upside down model for the niche industry versus the passenger vehicle.
There's still changes. I know robotic research is deploying 3 fully autonomous buses in Connecticut on the BRT line. The interesting thing is these are New Flyer buses. It's coming off the New Flyer production line with the technology in it, which means over time the cost will come down. We're also working with a transit authority for bus yard automation. And if that happens, you have all this technology on the bus for bus yard automation that can be used for BRT and everything else.
Yes, there's a hand up with our virtual attendee. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And thanks for the presentation, Amanda. I've got kind of a statement, I guess, and then ultimately a question. So I think we know that, like, what I would love to see another click of this presentation is around like safety, not just safety for those in the vehicle, but safety for those that are not driving the vehicle. In particular, what I didn't see in the presentation is the opportunity for this new technology to address speed, because speed really kills at the end of the day, and a vehicle that isn't speeding is less likely to kill a pedestrian or another vehicle driver or a person riding a bus or the like. And so, I think it's great, the technology that is coming online, but I guess the question is how are we using the technology and the capacities of the connected network to address speeding in a way that is more intentional in a direct, targeted programmatic way. And I recognize that this is a very high level presentation and there's a lot of tactics, but, having talked to the folks up at Hopkins that are leading the Safe Systems Consortium around the country, and talking to a few folks throughout the vehicle manufacturing world, I think that there's a great opportunity for Virginia to consider leading on whether it be voluntary or working with the industry to make it more mandatory, but like speed assistance systems, so that folks are alerted every time that they're speeding, their car tells them that they're going too fast. I mean, that is just a voluntary thing that seems like it's something that's probably achievable, in terms of mapping out where what the speeds are on our roads, and then having that data feed run to the cars. Of course, the vehicles would have to ultimately create the code and the system for it to operationalize. But I think, a state like the Commonwealth, and maybe with partners like the consortium or others, could really kind of be at the forefront of trying to address speeding, which, sadly, there's terrible news happening throughout the region of young kids, of elders, et cetera, just trying to cross a road that is unsafe, and we need to re-engineer it, of course, but and do the 5 E's of enforcement, et cetera. But I think we've got a responsibility here within the connected and autonomous space to really be looking at what we can do before we ever get to full automation within the technology space that we have at our fingertips today to try to address it. And Amanda, if you're doing it, great, kudos, love to hear more, but I just wanted to really kind of make a statement and see get the room's reaction.
So I can answer some of those pieces, and I also have some information about what we're seeing in the industry that might sort of just be food for fodder. So for instance, on the connective side, we're looking at a couple of different things. The speed limit information that we push out, that information is available through our Smarter Roads data portal. So a lot of times, like the Googles and Waze of the world are pulling that information from us. And then additionally, we're looking at those instances where we send alerts directly to the vehicle, like that work zone demonstration. I didn't have time to go through it, but one of the alerts that we designed within the work zone diagram that came up was the lower speed alert. So it came up on the dash and said work zone speed limit 25. So that was designed into that technology. Now, as you said, we can build it into our work zone application, but then we have to push it to the OEMs, who then have to figure out how to display it. And there's lots of discussion and research going on, like the Connected Vehicle Pool Fund study, which Virginia runs, which is a bunch of states pooling their research money, are looking at queue warnings. That's going to be something that we're going to talk about recently, about when do you send those warnings. So with speed, that's something that we are definitely also looking at, along with variable speed limits, and how can we provide that information using connected non-automated vehicles to, again, control speed. Now, conversely to that, the vehicles that are on sale today, you can set your cruise control above the speed limit, and that is what consumers expect of the vehicles that they purchase, which means that it is likely those companies will continue to sell those vehicles. Now, we're watching that, particularly in the automation sphere, because we won't see the benefits out of automation if they just program the vehicle to drive the way humans drive. But at the same time, the automation will get on the roads if people don't want to purchase it. So we're having to have these long-term discussions back and forth with the industry and with safety advocates and with researchers about what we change when, what we can put in the automation that other human drivers anticipate them driving the same way. If an automated vehicle can't go over the speed limit, but all the folks around it can, there's all sorts of issues there that we are watching and trying to get our hands around that are difficult. In addition, we are looking at using connectivity for your vulnerable road users, for your pedestrians, for your folks crossing, sidewalk, crossing the crosswalk. Can they activate the signal, and the signal provide information to the vehicle saying, hey, there's someone in the crosswalk? Is there going to be something eventually where your phone, like I would love it if my running app said that to vehicles in my neighborhood, particularly if they're pulling out of blind spots with bushes and things. It's like, hey, there's a runner ahead, please don't hit me. So those are the kinds of things we're looking to see how we can support, whether it's by pushing data, whether it's by building our own infrastructure devices, whether it's in the virtual space, or whether it's frankly just making sure that
these safety concerns are communicated to the industry that is building either the cell phone applications or the vehicles. So that's all the stuff going on in a nutshell, very quickly, but I could talk more.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a couple of things to what Amanda said. One is, as you know, we are now deploying a variable speed limit system on I-95 between Fredericksburg and Richmond. And we are looking at the opportunities once that system comes online. I think we have a research project we're proposing to look at how we communicate that through a connected vehicle application, the variable speed limits. As the speed limit changes, we push that information out to the vehicles directly. So we see an opportunity there. We understand what Joe is talking about, that it's important for us, and we're looking at the opportunities to do that speed information and pushing that to the vehicles. In terms of the pedestrians, we also have a research project with PTTI in Blacksburg, where we deploy LiDAR and call it a smart intersection, where that LiDAR detects every pedestrian movements and bicycle movements, and they are going to alert the vehicles. And so there is a lot of work that's ongoing in that space. I think they completed their first phase in January, February timeframe, right? So they're going to, they've done the initial demonstration to see how the pedestrians move. I think they waited until the school came back in January to collect the data. They collect a lot of these kids near the stadium moving back and forth, and they're always cross at the crosswalks. And so that's a really perfect test case for us. So there's a lot of data collected. So there's going to be something come out of that to make our intersections much more smarter, much more safer for pedestrians and bicycles. So there's a lot of effort that's already ongoing, and I take your point, Joe, that's an important aspect we should continue to look at.
Yeah. And maybe I might add just like one last thing, and then I'll pipe down. But like, I think that there is a, what is available today if we listen to, the private industry here. And I work for Greater Washington Partnership. It's a bunch of CEOs from Baltimore to Richmond, and this is not necessarily our bread and butter in terms of what I work on within our infrastructure space. But as a professional and an interested resident in this subject matter in this region, I think there's a policy implication here, right? If the industry is not ready for it, I think we can go ahead and try our best to create the data fields and the push notification system so that we can say we are ready for it. And then it's a policy prescription, right? At the end of the day, we can say to Senator Warner, Senator Kaine, our House members to ask to work with Secretary Buttigieg, and that's to work with the OEMs. The General Assembly can put out pass a bill and sign it into law that says like it is the sense that of the Commonwealth that we want to see this happen. So some of this stuff is like, I understand we're all practitioners here in this space, in this conversation, and there's only so much you can do. But then we also get into the policy prescription, and chair, vice chair, like that's a question for you guys to consider, both within your communities, but also what opportunities MBTA has to be kind of a messenger and a communicator as well. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but I think, glad to know you guys are aware and pushing on it. I think that this is one of those ones that we push to the side and just assume that the connected and autonomous vehicles are going to solve everything, when we actually have a lot of the technology today and the know-how today, but we're not yet kind of putting the might into it to try to address one of the main causes for vehicle-related deaths.
Thank you. To offer a couple observations. Try to distill all this and to try to move us forward in the NBTA context. I think we all need to know more about what are we really talking about with connected vehicles and what should we be funding in the short term and medium term. Because all this is great, but it's got to translate into projects that are are fundable within the fairly near future. So what do we really mean with connected vehicles? And so for me, it seems to me there's a major role for us at NVDA because we're lucky to have both planning and funding capabilities. So what do we do in the next 1, 2, 3 years? How do we prioritize what we do? And then through the various systems we have, urge projects to do that. The second one is the area in the area of transit. I mean, we have funded transit in the past, and we will in the future. So what do we fund in the transit area? What projects in the transit area are most beneficial, not only for the large vehicles, but also micro transit? Because it seems to me that we ought to be able to move out on that pretty quickly. Little vehicles running around neighborhoods providing, there's a real gap in neighborhood accessibility. I mean, for those who are young or for those who can bike, biking is great. But for people that aren't able to bike, why do they have to drive their 6,000-pound car half a mile to go to the grocery store? I mean, so there's that. So those are the two areas that really occur to me. I mean, we are not going to invent or regulate autonomous vehicles. I mean, we're just not. The private sector is going to invent them. NHTSA is going to regulate them to the extent that they can. And so I think what we need to think about is what infrastructure will support those developments. But I also think they're kind of figuring out when they're really going to happen is, kind of a challenge. So anyway, my focus would be on connected vehicles and sort of connected. And I don't know where you fit in safe intersections in there somewhere. I mean, maybe people can help me, but I think there's a huge benefit for looking at pedestrian safety and bicycle safety. And maybe there's a separate category, which is safety and what technology should we support to improve safety. And I assume with connected vehicles, we're really talking about moving whatever vehicles are out there more efficiently to reduce congestion. So I think we pull in some of that as well. Anyway, those are some initial reactions I had. Number one, connected. Number two, transit. And number three, safety. Any other thoughts? I want to move this from discussion, and I'm so impressed, Amanda, with and frankly all of VDOT work. Every time I hear one of these presentations, it's brand new to me. It probably shouldn't be, but it is. But it's moving from that into actually doing something. After we've established the clear benefits to the public. So anyway, other thoughts, suggestions, areas of focus on?
Well, from VDOT perspective, we are available for MBTA to support, guide, share information, however the way you want us to help you. We are here to help. One thing we are really careful about is not to come in and say, there's always misinterpretation. Sometimes VDOT is coming on and saying, you got to do this. This is the way to do it. Is not a good way of doing business. And so we are now saying, this is all the information we're collecting, and this is the direction we're thinking about going. But it's available for anybody to use. And so if you want, as you develop projects or think about the priorities, we are here. You can talk to us and we will help any which way we can and connect the bridge between what we see in the industry, what we see in the research coming versus what is actually implementable. We are looking at the same thing, short-term, long-term, medium-term investment, because we realize in the Kona vision, something out there in the longer term is questionable. There's a lot of swing. But if you look at the short term, there are opportunities. So that's why a lot of those priorities that we identified in ours next 3 to 5 years is what we are focusing on, beginning to take actions. And so I offer that as, from our side, we are willing to share or consult whichever way you want us to.
Yes, please call me or email me at any time. I love talking about this. And if I don't have the research or the information at my fingertips, I will go find it. I have a lot of contacts in other states. So, and if the answer is we don't know yet, then we'll flag that as a question mark to be answered in general.
I think we just continue to collaborate because there is no single entity that is
No.
going to be able to implement what we're discussing. It's going to require local, state, federal, private industry, all working together. I think Bob raised a good point, especially when we're talking about retrofitting, because we get into, oh, what's new and shiny, that's constantly evolving versus what's on the street now, what are we doing now? And trying to marry that to make sure the investments are holistic. Some of the things are low-hanging fruit, others are not. And that's why we have, one of the reasons why we wanted to establish this committee and have the transportation technology strategic plan, because it is evolving, it will continue to evolve, but look at some of the things that we can do now. On the authorities end, of course, we're more capital oriented, but everything we do should have safety in mind. You know, if it's not safe, we shouldn't invest in it anyway. And then on the transit side, and I'm specifically talking about transit because we want to promote transit, get people out of the single occupied vehicles, making sure that, because Bob and I had a long discussion maybe this time last year about the technologies that you see for the bus manufacturers that they're doing. They're trying, what did Bob tell me? Trying to outfit the bus to fit the technology instead of fitting the technology around the buses or the trains, so to speak. So just making sure it's a more holistic approach and how we implement it, because we don't want something that, oh, it's great today, it works 2 years, and now it's no longer functional.
I agree. So are we ready to move to the next agenda item? I think really so here's a proposal for candidate topic overview. That we take what we've heard today and we sort through it and we begin to come up with project types that would be something that we want to, that we think have merit and that we want to work on. Autonomous vehicles, again, I mean, the private sector is going to do what it's going to do, and NHTSA is going to regulate it to the extent that NHTSA regulates. So my own view is the area is in connected for us. It's in connected, it's in transit technology, and it's in safety. Yes, go ahead.
No, even the AVs, we are looking at that. As an example, these AVs, everybody talk about how AVs will give more freedom for blind or handicapped people to move around more, or senior citizens to have their own mobility. We are looking at that, and so that's one of the next projects Amanda is going to lead, is to understand what that really means for infrastructure. How would a blind pedestrian know when the AV is there, and how do they get in? Where do we need to provide those handicap ramps to convert the AV to stop somewhere on the street for this handicapped person to get into the car? What do we know enough about how the AV is designed to make that available, and what is the nexus of that to some of the infrastructure side of it? So even though AVs, we are looking at that from infrastructure perspective, and that study will probably in the next 6 months or so going through those workshops, and we'll want to talk to different stakeholders and visually impaired or handicapped or senior citizen groups, understand how they maneuver, how do they go around, if this technology is available, what do they need from the state to improve our infrastructure. So we're developing them, so I would suggest or recommend that you probably put that also on the agenda, but probably in the back burner until we get it, probably not to completely decide yet on AVs or private sector. We don't have a role to play. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. We're looking at that right now. So I cannot tell you yet whether there is going to be a role for infrastructure owners to play a role in AV operation. Definitely, they're going to be in the cities, curbside management. Where do these AVs stop and start? How do they pick up people? They can pick up people in the middle of the road. Are you going to design some parking for them or manage drop-off locations? There are things from the agency's perspective we can influence how they operate on our roads. I'll just share.
Okay, other ideas for candidate projects for this group? I have one, hydrogen. Everybody's talking about it. The problem is it blows up sometimes. So I think we want to get into that area, and we also need to bring in our policy advocates. I don't know if that's of interest to people, but that's seems to be a lot of chatter about hydrogen and what it can do and not do. Is that of interest to folks? I don't know.
I'm not an expert in EVs, but I think we should be looking at options other than EVs. I worry that federal programs have already decided exactly how we're going to put out electric vehicles. Hydrogen is a different option. I think it should be.
I look at it from a safety standpoint. So
Yeah, there's a lot of issues.
It's all
There's
part of it.
infrastructure issues, there's safety issues.
California is really investing in hydrogen right now, so I don't have any contacts yet, or towards some extent I have not spent enough time looking at it. We are watching, but what we can share today is California is really investing significantly in hydrogen. And so they're probably developing a lot of technologies there we need to pay attention to, learn from. And so that's one thing probably we want to look at further into. And I suggest a good place to start is look at California and what they're doing in the hydrogen space. They're even going fully hydrogen from what I hear, significant investment to make it hydrogen.
Sounds like it's worthwhile. Anybody else have any ideas? Okay, so not hearing any, so we're going to talk about sort of safety technology. What are areas where we think we ought to focus in terms of potential future projects and funding? Same thing for connected, and third being transit and microtransit, and fourth topic now, which is more of a kind of a study type topic, is hydrogen. I also think with all this, we're getting at equity issues as well, microtransit, transit, so on. And we're getting at how to improve the efficiency of our office. Getting at all this. Any further discussion? Yes, Mackenzie, because you're going to have to live with what
Yes. Chair Snyder, if I might highlight, the TTSP does currently include 3 core values that are also integrated into transaction. And each of those core values are applied to all of the strategies, and they are equity, sustainability, and safety. So we look at each strategy through those lenses now, and we'll continue to do so with each of the topics the committee raises today.
Okay, sounds good. And I think each of these actually can enhance those. So what we're trying to do now is to move from theory to, okay, what can we do within a reasonable time frame? What would be good projects to move forward based upon the VDOT work and whatever other work? Yes.
If I may, so I was just trying to see where should I jump in and talk about this. None of this right time. In Amanda's presentation, you showed prioritization and some infrastructure projects and technology projects that you probably have already started or starting in this year to explore further. And we are in the same place with transaction update coming up. We already looked into similar options like roadside sensors and signages and things like that, that we can, as a public entity, we can do something. We can help jurisdictions do what as project, as you mentioned, Snyder. So we not only worked with you will probably do this term bottom-up projects and top-down projects that we keep talking about in transactions, where we work with the jurisdictions and agencies to see what kind of projects they have in their comprehensive plans and transit development plans and things like that for the next 10 to 20 years. Try to bring them up together to have at that regional look. And then also, when we look at all that projects and analyze them, we see certain areas where the needs, future needs are not met. So then we as a team sit together and see what more can be done. In many cases, the jurisdictions look at projects that is within their boundaries, not going beyond the boundaries. So that's most of the time, that's the kind of areas where we look at and say that there is something missing here. We need to connect this location to that location, which crosses through 3 different jurisdictions. And nobody has thought about that kind of inter-jurisdictional connection. So that's where we as a team look through and come back and say that, hey, we need to add 10 more projects to meet those needs. So that's what we call the top-down projects. So these areas, both areas, the bottom-up projects and the top-down projects, we looked at these technologies and specifically looking at how TTSP can inform the development of transaction. And the first part is where I mentioned earlier that we work with the jurisdictions to expand their thinking in terms of technology projects, intersection improvements, safety in terms of bike and pedestrian facilities, things like that, where you can bring in some of these thoughts, some of these elements into those project definitions. Even then, we saw that, as I said, still there are some gaps we needed to identify specifically. So that's where we came up with a list of top-down projects, which is exactly what some of the points that you raised, Chair Snyder, now. We have specifically identified projects. Again, this is not specific to a location. It can be anywhere in Northern Virginia. If City of Falls comes with a project for a specific location in the city, that can be then funded. If somebody else comes up with, then we can fund that too. So this includes CEV charging station. When we said CEV, we also left it open for a future hydrogen fuel cell. So we didn't say charging, we said charging/fueling station. It could be any fuel. It doesn't have to be electricity itself. So this is the kind of area where we kept it at a little bit vague or a little bit larger level, not going to the specifics. So it could be for trucks, transit, or regular cars. So that's a very high level project that we identified is needed to enable these electric vehicles in the future, or zero emission vehicles in the future. Similarly, for CAVs, I was happy to see the same components you mentioned in your slide. Signal improvements, roadside units, sensors, AV-ready signage, curbside management. Harry just mentioned about that. So we listed out actually these things in that general project definition and said that improvements like these. So we are not listing that these are the only items we can do there. If technology changes in the future, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, that can still be folded up into that project definition. But R3P is already working, making sure they mentioned that also takes care of many of the TTSP components that we have identified into implementation. We already had, as part of transaction development, we had a PRT planning working group, which included jurisdiction staff, agency staff, all the transit agency staff in Northern Virginia. Plus, we had District DOT, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Kamata, all these people sitting together and discussing not just 1 or 2 lines of BRT that's already in play, like Richmond Highway BRT or Duke Street Transit Way, but we also looked at it as a network. We want to create a network. It's having one or two lines here and there, it's not going to solve the mobility issues across the region. So we sat together, discussed over several meetings to come up with a network that can connect different lines that is already in play, plus the future BRT lines that can come in. And it not only looked at just a few lines, but then what other supporting facilities, infrastructure are needed, transit stations and say transfer stations, and one what we call as mobility hubs. It's not just bus to bus connection. It could be to railway. It could be to bike and pedestrian, bike share or other sort of movement mobility infrastructure. So we talked a lot of supporting projects that can enable that sort of a regional BRT network. And as part of that, I already mentioned the ZEV and CAV. It's not just for auto, it's for transit too. So we are supporting transit to be enabled into that sort of future. Vacancy has a few slides about micro transits. That's another project we already identified. Taking cue from Omnirite's initial idea, that's what I think you have a few slides. Maybe I'm taking away that thunder here, but PRDC already thought about that in Manassas Park, Manassas area, and talking to their staff, we took that as an idea and generalized it for entire Northern Virginia. So it can happen in Portchester, Manassas Park, Arlington, Alexandria, wherever people want to start something like that. Again, we have to be very careful about what NVT can fund. We cannot fund the operation, but we can fund the capital improvement cost for that by rolling stock, maybe roadside bus stops or other
Infrastructure.
other infrastructure improvements needed to enable that, and technology obviously. So that these are all, we already considered all these things, and these are being right now stitched into the transaction plan update. So I just wanted to say that many of the things that you already mentioned, we need to consider as projects we are already considering in the transaction update. When it comes to the funding part of things, though these type of technology improvements are not necessarily described or thought about when we had adopted the transaction last year in 2017. So the current call for projects or the current 6-year program update underway is based on the previous, the current transaction, I would say, the transaction adopted in 2017, and not many technology projects were thought about at that time. People were not looking into the future that way. So the projects that are currently out there in consideration for funding may not have that components in place, but if they want to do it, we can still do it because it's not restricted. What the difference between the transaction, project description and transaction and the 6-year program is, one in transaction, it could be a little bit general and at the planning concept level projects. But when you come to the 6-year program, we need to have a little bit more details, a little more flushed out. The description should be a little bit more solid so we can analyze them and fund them, and we know what that money we are spending, what are we getting back. We have to have that clarity in the 6-year program when we come to the funding level. So going forward, the next 6-year program onwards will be based on the current update of transaction. Once we adopt that in December, the next cycle will be based on that program. And that's where we have all these technology-related projects listed in transactions, so they will be eligible for funding the next round onwards. I think the next round will be for revenues from 28 and 29. So the earliest that these projects can come into play in 6-year program, and our funding is 27 or 28.
And that's theoretical.
That's theoretical. I was going to
We
say
have
that.
been in a position to advance
Yes.
fund some projects and honor a request to advance fund. So if you're approved in an outer year, you may be able to accommodate funding the project sooner.
Transaction have enough in it that we can do some pivoting on technology issues. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, if it's not a transaction, we can't do it.
We can't fund it, that is correct, but I think this current update that we're working on, and we're gonna have a work session with the authority on May the 19th. I think it is more holistic, and again, we try to keep, I don't wanna say it's too broad, but we try to make sure we give ourselves, localities and agencies, some flexibility. So once we reach the point of an application stage, then, you know, you're not as restricted, because
Right.
again, we, as Sri noted, we do need to be in a position to be able to adequately analyze, but I think it gives us a lot, because we took the transportation technology strategic plan and really tried to incorporate those elements into the transaction update, do some of the scenario analyses, and not only with technology, you know, looking at teleworking and other things, and making sure we're keeping our goals and our core values top of mind as well regarding, you know, what are we doing for equity and things of that nature. So I would say it does, but we are going to have what we call, I guess, a work session with the staff on the latest iteration on where we are with some of the projects and things of that nature. Again, we do bottom up and top down, and I get it, a lot of localities and agencies, they want to submit everything they have because they want to put themselves in alignment and eligibility for funding. But for us, we're talking about a 20-25 year plan. So we're trying to be more holistic in the approach and making sure we give ourselves room to be flexible with the technology.
No, that's really important. Thanks for that. Thanks.
Mr.
Maybe
Chair.
some descriptive information, a little bit explaining this might be useful. I think we're trying to make transaction a bit more capable to evolve more rapidly, particularly important in the technology.
No, when you ask for projects and I thought about the technology projects in the future are not going to be something installing on the road. Even connectivity to the vehicles, we are tracking, working with, for example, Verizon to be able to push that information directly to the vehicle through the systems we have in the back end directly to the vehicle. There's no need to put anything roadside with the 5G communications and some of the advanced communications. They are building out a lot of the things and they're testing a lot of things to be able to connect directly with the vehicles. So as part of the NVTA funding, I am not sure how you would look at that, what you fund, but it's critically important when you talk about the technology funding to be able to fund some of the back-end IT systems. That's where the future is, to be able to connect with the vehicles. A lot of times the cities focus on, or the counties focus on their IT funding separately and the IT side separately. Anything transportation is building something on the road, but now we are looking at a lot of these even internally. That's where our RM3P funding came from the 6-year plan through that ITPF funding, recognizing that we need to fund some of these back-end systems, the data exchange platforms. If you want to exchange the data with the vehicle, it is going to be coming through a server somewhere. And if you don't have investments in that space, none of this connectivity will be possible. So I don't know if you need to change anything or it fits into your program plan currently or the transaction.
Well, I would say it's not all on us. That's when I get to the whole collaborative effort. We have the IIJA, you know, with over $550 million of new money. So, and it is a lot of money for technology. So again, it's really working collaboratively. While I would say Northern Virginia is a leader in the industry, we can't do everything. We really need this to be a holistic and collaborative effort.
I guess my question is, Route 29 is a state highway, it runs through the city of Falls Church. Are you saying that we don't need to do anything to make that highway connect? It's already
It could be, that's one of the evolutionary things that are happening, but how do you connect that? Who controls the signals along that 29? If the signals are controlled by a central server software that's connecting to that signal and getting that information out, the future that one scenario, again, anything is possible. One scenario would be that the backend system that controls the traffic signals will communicate with the vehicles. Not the roadside traffic signal that we see as a human being, look at the red signal head or control bar. Or right now, a lot of research has been done and development in putting the roadside radios to connect with the vehicle. But those kinds of things will eventually evolve to the system-to-system connectivity. And that's where we need the investments in upgrading our systems, cybersecurity of those systems, and all of those. Now you're connecting and talking to the people. That's where we are making a lot of investments in VDOT, is to upgrade cybersecurity of our systems and upgrading our systems, moving into the cloud in different ways. That's a whole new other topic, but I just want to share that when you're thinking about the future and the funding, if we continue to focus on the roadside aspect of it, it may not get us where we want to go. We also need the technology investment should include both the backend systems, communication networks, and the field devices. All three components fit into the future of transportation technology.
Mr. Chair, I would say we're waiting to hear this administration's transportation priorities. We are hearing that there is a surplus in transportation revenues, and a lot of that is given due to the stimulus money. And I said 550 million, I meant billion in new money that, let me correct myself, billion in new funding regarding what we will see due to the federal infrastructure bill. So again, I think that it requires all of us to work collectively, to work in tandem. And we really want to know what is this administration's priorities as well, because that will help, because the administration or the Commonwealth will receive a lot of money from the IIJA. And a lot of that is existing grant money. Hopefully the Commonwealth will do well with the new monies, and then we can all work collectively so that we're not being siloed off, because this does affect all of us. And I don't want us to be in a situation, well, you're responsible for this and you're responsible for that, and I can't really get it done, and this locality doesn't want to do it. And we really should think big picture on how we're moving people, how technology is a part of that, how equity and safety and everything is a part of how we get it done.
Yeah, okay. Great discussion, very helpful. So, good, thanks for the VDOT work for sure. Okay, so I think we've got some topics for the future. 7th Annual Northern Virginia Transportation Roundtable. Mackenzie, you want to give us a quick summary?
Yes, Chair Snyder, pardon me while I skip just a couple slides here. Wonderful. So on March 30th, which was a Wednesday, Northern NVTA hosted the 7th Annual Northern Virginia Transportation Roundtable in partnership with a longstanding partnership with the Intelligent Transportation Society of Virginia, or ITSPA, and also worked with the sponsor Cambridge Systematics. There were nearly 120 people in attendance across 2 different virtual platforms, YouTube and WebEx, and we invited everyone, regardless of the platform that they use, to participate in real time using chat boxes and live polling. What you're seeing on your screen now is an example of the results of the live polling. We created a word cloud of responses from the attendees when we asked them, what innovative transportation solution would you personally be most interested in seeing Northern Virginia explore further? We did ask them to use one word, and it seems that the results that we saw on the 30th align nicely with the things the committee spoke about today. You can see that the biggest word in that cloud is in fact, hydrogen. And that was a result of great conversations with 2 sets of panels that we had. There's also a few other topics in there dealing with automation, electrification, but it also, I wanted to highlight, there are many different words because we didn't pre-populate, and a lot of them coalesce on single topics. And I just want to point out that there's a lot there on a multimodal approach to transportation and giving people information they need, which all again maps back nicely to our discussion today. One other thing I wanted to bring to your attention regarding the roundtable was that we had 2 panels, the first of which focused on electrification most directly, but also explored things like hydrogen, and that's where we got the more broad discussion about propulsion technologies. And all of that maps back really nicely to the current TTSP strategy to advance decarbonization of the transportation system. The second panel had a variety of speakers that talked on innovation across the transportation sector, both in Northern Virginia and more broadly across the fields and in different locations. We had a representative from Cambridge Systematics speak about the integration of the TTSP and transaction in regards to scenario analysis. We had an individual from New York City MTA speak about their tolling program, which was very fascinating conversation. They're really far along in that process, and that content that she shared will be very relevant to working on TTSP strategy number 5 about developing pricing mechanisms and travel demand management options. There's also a presentation about the Regional Multimodal Mobility Program, or RM3P, that we touched on a couple of times today. And that is incorporated throughout the TTSP and also referenced in transaction and MBTA again as a co-sponsor there. Finally, there was a presentation from Greg Rogers, who's actually a member of the TTC and a leader for Neuro. And he talked about how autonomous vehicles can be used for local deliveries and how that can impact our transportation network. All of that information was very helpful in considering how we can move forward with TTSP strategy number 4 to minimize potential zero occupancy passenger vehicle miles traveled. And all of it will be really useful in evaluating the topics that the committee has suggested today. So thank you for taking everything that we've been working on and building that further and giving us great information to move forward with. I think that's it for me, Chair Snyder.
Thank you. And now to our CEO Monahan.
I will be brief because Sri really did speak to what I was going to say, what we're doing with the transaction update of the current 6-year program update that we're working on that we anticipate the authority will adopt in July based on our current transaction plan, which was adopted in 2017. However, in December of this year, we will ask the authority to adopt the updated plan. So funding programs moving forward will be based off the updated transaction plan. Now, that's not to say we don't have any technology in the current plan, but it's very minimum compared to what we're producing and the inputs for the update. I will note the public comment period for the 6-year program starts this Friday. If you're so inclined, we have 26 projects. We will be releasing the evaluation and the results of how the project scored. It starts this Friday, April 15th. It closes May the 22nd. We are having an open house jointly with some of the regional entities, including the Commonwealth and NBTC, VRE. Bob, I don't think they tapped PRTC to be a part of this. This is a legislatively mandated joint annual meeting that we have to have, but we are going to use that as the open house, and the public hearing is actually on May the 12th. So again, 26 projects requesting $1.2 billion, and people have asked me, oh, how much will you have? I can tell you how much we won't have, and that's $1.2 billion. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Well, you can't end on that. How much will we?
We are working on the numbers.
Thanks. Anybody have any other comments? We solicit comments anytime, anyway. Carrier pigeon, telephone, telegraph, email, you know.
Absolutely.
whatever. And much appreciated. But yeah, any ideas for future agenda? I want to thank the presentation, especially useful, and all the comments from VDOT and the comments from our MBTA staff. So, anybody have anything else they want to discuss? Okay, thank you. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.